So welcome to this episode in the podcast series about wisdom, brought to you by Stuart Neville from Mindful Developments and Adam Wells from adamwells.com. Welcome, and today we're going to be thinking again about wisdom. We've already been thinking about wisdom from a few different perspectives. And where I've come to in my thinking and in the conversation with Adam is thinking about wisdom as a capacity or a characteristic that we have to be sensitive. That means to be turned on to our feelings and feeling life, as opposed to shut off or avoiding or repressing or projecting what we're feeling. We've thought about realism and being realistic and that idea and that experience and reflected on that. And we've touched on a couple of other issues as well, such as kind of maturity and how we kind of mature through our life and psychologically, and to a certain extent also being in touch with our own conscience or moral sense and our own integrity, etc. What I wanted to do today was then to take that, we don't need to define it too concretely, but take that as a basis, then to think about the characteristics we might develop in ourselves, some other characteristics that can help us in our personal development journey or our discovery of wisdom for ourselves. And I wanted to start off with the characteristic of humility and really think about humility. Does that kind of strike a chord? Do we think it's important? And is it an important part of this process of developing wisdom and maturity that we've been talking about? So without further ado, Adam, what do you think? Is humility important to you?
It is important. I think it really sort of demonstrates your sort of sense of self-awareness, of how aware you are of the world around you. A couple of days ago, there was that Senate hearing with regard to COVID-19 in the States, and you had the Anthony Fauci, I'm not sure how you say it, the lead scientist in the US, and he sat there and said, I'm humble enough to say that I don't have all the answers to this. This is the lead scientist in the US on COVID-19. Mr. Trump is saying, actually, this is all going to be solved by the end of next week, so to speak. Those words of that lead scientist, he's the expert and humble enough to just recognize he doesn't have all the answers. And I think that really demonstrates it's something more than just about me. It's something much bigger. And when we're in that place of humility, we're able to go with the flow and accept and not try and control life. And there we have that sort of sense of flow and peace of mind in many ways, even though it may well be difficult. It's important.
I like that story. It's a great example. I don't know the particular scientist in question. A couple of thoughts come to mind as you're telling that story, Adam. One is it the kind of self-importance, but there's a danger in that, in being self-important and being super confident. So if you views and opinions that you identify with, these are my views and opinions, and I'm really confident about them, and I'm a powerful, self-important person, and I've got my views, and I can put them across strongly, and other people tend to be like, oh, right, that they sound very confident, they must know what they're talking about. Actually, there's a danger to that. The alternative to that, which is being able to have a lack of self-importance, to be able to say, actually, I don't know the answer to a question, or even, well, I have a view, but I got it wrong. Or actually, I'm going to change my opinion. I'm going to adapt my perception and my understanding. I'm going to be able to see that what I thought was correct a little while ago, I don't see it the same way anymore. And in the future, the way I see things now might not be the same way anymore. So that adaptability by holding views and opinions lightly, and the lack of self-importance, or the humility, I guess that's what it means, the term, does correlate very concretely, doesn't it, to that being open-minded and being inquisitive and being able to learn and understand and see things differently,
I think there's a recognition too that life is ever-changing. Who am I to have all the answers? And think that I'm right the whole time and everything else. We know for sure that we don't have the answers.
On the one hand, you need a lot of confidence to be able to admit you don't know, or to have humility. It takes a lot of confidence to be that way. And yet, there's quite a lot of influence in the world and professional world and to have answers. And sometimes we do need to have answers. And people sometimes look to individuals to have that view and to think, I'm right, I'm right and you're wrong. And particularly when people argue, on the one hand, well, I'm right, no, and you're trying to persuade other people of your point of view. Someone else might think differently, and then they're arguing, and it's almost like who can argue the best, or who's the most assertive or confident in their own views, as opposed to the type of confidence to have humility. Say, well, I don't know. I'm willing to reflect on the one hand this, on the other hand that.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking there's an inner strength to you for you to be able to stand up and say, I don't know. And that may come from years of experience of difficult situations. You know who you are. There's a true north inside you. You're speaking from this place of strength, as opposed to an individual who really doesn't have those inner resources and you're grasping for straws. I think there is a character trait, and you've learned from life's experiences to give you that inner strength.
Yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? If you've got that self-confidence, is what are you confident in? Are you confident in your own humanity, your own intuition and sensitivity and intelligence, innate intelligence to be able to assess and adapt, etc., etc.? Or are you just confident because you've got a particular view or opinion, because your subjective interpretation is where your identity is? There is a kind of something around humility where your own views and opinions aren't the be all and end all. They're not completely believable. They're kind of influenced, they're conditioned. They get conditioned by what you watch on the news, or who you talk to, or what newspaper you read, or that type of thing. And I don't know, I think there's something about almost seeing the relative value of being opinionated or feeling really self-important, and the fragility of it, and also sometimes the absurdity of it, and to kind of take confidence in another part of who we are, not just our thinking self and our opinionated self and our powerful self in a social status kind of relationship, in a deeper way than that. I think that's kind of really important.
I think so. And I think there's a thing too around attachment, being humble. You're not actually necessarily attached to any result, are you? It is what it is, and this is the reality. So you're not trying to prove anything. Maybe it's like that example with the scientist. He knows the truth. To be humble, I'm going to let that be. I'm not going to get angry and scream and shout. You're not attached to the result.
It's a much more receptive way of being, to have reduced need to dominate and be in control and be powerful, and my opinion matters more than other people. It's quite a kind of yang or forceful way of being. Whereas on the other hand, to have humility and be able to not know, and to be able to wait, and to be able to see if some understanding emerges organically. Maybe it emerges organically from within ourselves. Because we were open-minded, it might come from somebody else, or we might listen to someone in a receptive way, and then our views change because we've understood what someone else is saying in a different way. And actually, there's so much in the world, I think, social things, certain settings, often in work settings, for example, if you're in a senior position, you're meant to be the expert or something, then there's this pressure to have the answer. And that your personal subjective view is, and your self-importance is part of your role, as opposed to having humility and receptivity and some spontaneity and some creativity, which you can't have if you're also very dominant and very directive and very self-important.
But is not our society sort of set up that we put this pressure on these senior people in leadership to have answers? We want certainty, we want direction, we want to be told.
But don't you also think, with that story that you told about that guy in the news saying, I wish I did, but I don't have the answers, that's the truth. We have to keep researching and keep studying to find it out. And that's when somebody in a senior position role models that type of humility, it's also quite inspiring, and it's also saying, well, that's allowable. It's almost role modeling. And if we can kind of see someone doing it and they're not shot down for doing that, then it kind of almost makes it allowable, doesn't it, that we can be that way a bit more. Or if somebody else is like that, we see the positive side of it as opposed to seeing it as weakness. I think bringing that quality of humility helps other people as well. It gives space for other people to also have some of the airwaves, have some of the space, come up with their ideas. It doesn't have to be me, my ideas. It could be someone else's ideas, because you're creating the space for that. And your humility actually allows other people to flourish, I think, perhaps.
Yes, you're giving space, and it's not all about you.
Yeah.
Personal level, do we think we're humble, or what are these experiences of humility? I think in many ways with the virus and what we're seeing and reading in the press, and the nurses and the doctors at the front line, humbled by their courage. I think we have to be aware enough to be able to recognize that and acknowledge a moment for humility, and it's a moment for reflection.
I think what you're talking about is, like inspiration, isn't it? If you're inspired by somebody else,
sure,
it can humble yourself because you're recognizing someone else's value. Your self-importance is kind of going a bit to the back, and someone else's values coming up, and that's a really nice compliment to the pursuit of one's own self-importance. And it's more enjoyable, and it's inspiring, and it's uplifting. And if you value something in someone else, then you're kind of almost, I think, recognizing that we might not be in that position ourselves, but there's a nobility to being that way. And, it puts us in a position, I think, where we can then learn and emulate and maybe take on, some of those qualities ourselves in the future.
Wasn't the whole country humbled by Captain Tom and his exploits? A 99-year-old man, to me, that was wow. Humility there around, we're never too old to begin something. There is a reason for living. You never know in your life what's possible. Who would have thought at 99 you still had all that in you, and you're going to raise £32 million for the NHS? That's humbling, and it's inspirational.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it kind of directly relates to that particular example, but I was just thinking about, in a time of coronavirus, that when there's something that's bigger than us that we can't control, like a pandemic, that it humbles you in a particular way. And I wonder whether, I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but oftentimes in a kind of competitive environment, where we're having to present ourselves in a kind of self-important way, and that's cut and thrust of the commercial world or what have you, is often, not always, can often be that way. And people that rise to the kind of more senior positions and the more successful people are often people who develop a personality that's based in self-importance, projection of strength, success and significance and importance, etc. So the thing that interests me is that in that, if that's the measure of success and acceptability, and that's what's respected and valued, is to be that type of person, the message is also that any kind of feeling, subjective feeling of weakness or failure or insignificance is potentially humiliating. And we shouldn't be that way. I don't want to feel that. I want to be a successful, strong, dominant person. I don't want to be weak. That's what like a real man is, or that's what a successful, powerful person is, or a corporate leader is. Whereas to kind of have the confidence in humility, I think what it means is that you're not living in fear of those feelings. That if you do have fluctuations of feeling like you don't know, that you're weak, that you failed, or you're insignificant, or you can't solve a problem, you can't take the lead, that type of experience internally isn't terrifying. Because if it is terrifying, you're always going to veer towards dominance and power and self-importance. So almost like humility, to me, implies that we've made peace with those feelings in ourselves, as and when, if they don't have to be there, but as and when, or if and when they arise, they're not going to wobble too much with it. And somehow, like coronavirus pandemic time, we're all somehow having to get heads around the fact that there's a potential inability to, that our self-importance, our dominance, our power isn't necessarily going to get us through this. So we're having to get a head around our limited power, significance, and agency.
There's a letting go of our powers,
yeah.
Recognition of who we are, and we have to deal with it. We can't run away from it. Accept the reality.
Yeah,
sense.
and if you can't meet someone else's expectations, or you can't meet your own expectations or society's expectations as you identify with them, the way that you've been valued by other people, whatever characteristics tend to draw on to take that value from other people, hierarchies or what have you, to kind of understand that that's part of a polarity, and the other side of the polarity, our feelings of lack of power or helplessness or what have you, is part of the human experience as much as feeling powerful. Helplessness is as much an experience, and actually there's a wisdom in the humility that comes from knowing that kind of feeling of insecurity is okay, it's part of us, it's a feeling that's natural enough, we don't have to fight against it and always be powerful. And actually there's a kind of upside to being at peace with that type of experience, because then we can be confident in not knowing without it being a scary, neurotic, unsettling experience.
It's that willingness to surrender to what is, being humble to what is. In doing that, you then can sort of embrace the insecurity and recognize that security that we all seek actually comes from embracing the insecurity and not running away from insecurity. Being humble means I'm stepping into insecurity. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I know what you mean.
I think there's that thing, we're always looking for security and answers, but actually the security comes from that we seek is being able to do that dance when it is all going crazy.
Well, that's, when things don't go to plan, or there's, like you say, there's something that we can't control, like a virus or what have you, there's an upside to relaxing into and settling into that type of thing of, well, I don't know, I don't have the answer. And actually that's a positive thing, to have the opportunity, not to have to be self-important, not to have to have the answers, not to have to be kind of trading on your personal subjective views and opinions about this, that or the other. Just a few months ago, everyone was arguing about this view of Brexit or that view of Brexit, and everyone was holding their views so strongly and so tightly. And now it's got very different. It's kind of like, okay, don't know. We're just living in uncertainty. And then individually, the kind of experience is one more of humility, but also I think of wisdom as well in the not knowing, if you relax into it. People still have coronavirus, obviously, and this, that, and the other, PPE and public transport and other. But I think, in the not knowing, a different mindset, and I think there's a value to it.
I think adopting this philosophy, I don't know the answers to everything, I'm going to just embrace this humility. There's a lot less energy being used. You're not having to constantly seek knowledge, answers, and actually it is what it is, and a lot less processing going on in your mind, fears, worries, and everything else. If you can surrender to it, it will be what it will be. It might be a simpler way of living life. I know it sounds a bit paradoxical.
No, maybe I have the last word. When I was a kid, there was a song my mum used to sing, Que Sera, Sera. Do you remember that song? Que Sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que Sera, Sera. Wisdom in these simple messages.